I'll try to make this as painless as possible for you. First of all, this is my second year coming to the conference, and you know, seriously, what a wealth of information, what a wealth of knowledge. It is such a pleasure to meet everybody here, and when else do you get the opportunity to speak face-to-face with some of these physicians and get all this information? This is wonderful, and I want to thank Stanford for putting this on. Absolutely great. So, oh, okay. Can everybody hear me now? Yeah. Is that a good thing or a bad thing? All right, so I'm up here to tell you a little bit about my story and a little bit about my journey. So this is my second year at the conference, like I said, and you know, some of the people I've met along the way in my journey has really been the most important aspect. So I was diagnosed with myotonic dystrophy back in 2006. And you know, as with many of the people in this room, it runs in my family as well. So my father had it. We suspect that my brother had it. So my father had 3 kids. So my brother and I both had it. My sister has not been tested. But then as far as some of my external family, I've got 2 aunts that also had it, a cousin that also had it. So anybody who says that there's a 50-50 chance of it moving on, I think it might be a little bit higher than that. But those are just my thoughts. So when I've heard other speakers talk in the past, one of the things that they always have a special talent. So I was trying to think of a special talent that I could actually appropriately share with this group. And it was a little difficult for me to come up with, but I'm going to keep it really simple. Everybody in this room obviously got up this morning, and everybody came here. And that is the special skill that I also have. And that's the ability to get up and come here after we've been knocked down. So I want to commend everybody in this room for taking the chance to come here, listen to some of the stories, and get to know some of the people. So what is ForEver Strong? ForEver Strong is an inspirational memoir, a book that I've been working on for the last several years. And I'm hoping to be able to release it in April of this year. So where did I come up with ForEver Strong? The for portion of ForEver is because I did a particular expedition and I did it when I was 4 years old. Ever, because the expedition I did was hiking to the base camp of Mount Everest. And strong because in spite of all the challenges I've faced, I've tried to stay strong throughout. So that's kind of where the book came from. So that's probably the wrong button. All right, so how did this all begin? In 2000, for me, it all began with cardiac conditions. So I have myotonic dystrophy type 2, and cardiac conditions do come along with it. So in 2000, I was first diagnosed with something called atrial fibrillation. And for the most part, I was told, you know, don't really worry about it. It's pretty common, especially in the adult population. At the time, I was in my early to mid-20s. So I was essentially told not to worry too much about it. So I kind of went on with my life. Then 2003 came along, and 2003 is when we went to war again with Iraq, and I happened to be a very patriotic person, and so I wanted to try to find a way to get involved. So I tried to take the necessary steps, and I met with a cardiologist, and I was on a medication, and I basically said, I'd like to come off this medication and get into the military. Can you support that? And you know, my physician took a very good approach. It was a matter of, you know what, you're kind of young to be going through this, so let's do a few tests, let's see how you do. And unfortunately for me, that time in my life was very horrific, and it was kind of like high school or college when you're going through finals. And every test I took, I failed. And so at the end of all that, I was introduced to a geneticist, and the geneticist said, you know, Rob, oh my gosh, you should play the lottery. Because it was like Murphy's Law for a period of time, and anything that could go wrong did go wrong. And it was a very succinct amount of time. This was over the course of like 2 or 3 weeks. I was a former college athlete, and you know, I had a good muscular build, and you know, all of a sudden all this happens to me, and you know, they're initially telling you things like, you know, we don't want you doing anything any more active than playing golf. I'm in my mid-20s and I'm single, and you don't want me to do anything more active than playing golf. That was a little tough for me to swallow. But anyway, that's what introduced me to the concept of writing a book, was when I talked to my geneticist. And so, like any good story, you want to find an appropriate ending, right? So I'm thinking, okay, at this point, I'm 27 years old, I got a heart condition, what would be a better ending than falling in love, right? Well, here I am 14 years later, and that still hasn't happened yet. However, along the way, there's been a lot more obstacles. And so, my conditions at various times continued to deteriorate. In 2004, I had another surgery. In 2004, my brother also passed away, and we think he had muscular dystrophy as well. In 2005, my father was misdiagnosed with limb-girdle muscular dystrophy. And then in 2006, I actually received my diagnosis with muscular dystrophy shortly after my mom had a stroke. So it was a very difficult time. And so one of the things that really helped me to get through that particular time was finding strength in others. So again, that's where I come back to everybody here being in this room. This is where a lot of the strength, this is where a lot of the information comes from. And being able to share my story with you, it truly is an honor, and I really appreciate it. So I tend to be kind of a goal-oriented person. So after I got diagnosed with myotonic dystrophy in 2006, the only thing I had to try to compare to was my father. The MDF at that time didn't exist. The MDA did, but there was only so much information about myotonic dystrophy, and especially myotonic dystrophy type 2. So being a goal-oriented person and watching my father's decline and his inability to walk and get around from one place to another, I kind of felt like, okay, I need to put together a bucket list. And one of the things I always wanted to do, I absolutely love to travel. I wanted to go to the Great Wall of China, and I wanted to be able to hike and jog on the Great Wall of China. So I did. And you know what? One of the other things I want everybody to keep in mind, everybody in this room is unique and different. Whether you have DM1, whether you have DM2, or whether or not you're a supporter of somebody who does. We are all unique and different, and we all struggle with challenges and detours in our respective lives. So we all have passions and we all have goals. Whatever yours is, find it and pursue it. That's how I started, and that's how my journey began. So, moving forward a little bit, in 2011, my heart condition, as well as some of my other conditions, continued to deteriorate a little bit. That's actually me. So, and this is me too. So, anyway, I went through what's called a typical ablation, where they go in, and again, my underlying heart condition was atrial fibrillation. And with an ablation, they try to cauterize your heart, and they try to take out the piece of your heart that's not beating properly. Essentially, that's a quick and dirty way to present it. And they talk about some of the ways that it might not work, but they don't always tell you some of the ways could potentially get worse. And again, going back to playing the lottery, 1 in a million circumstance, well, that happened to me again in 2011. So over the course of the year, I had 20 shocks with my defibrillator. I had a total of 5 cardiac surgeries. I had 7 ER visits, 6 ambulance rides, 5 calls to 911, and just to throw a little icing on the cake, collapsed lung. So again, life is full of challenges and life is full of detours. And one of the common questions that everybody asks me is, how do you deal with it? How did you deal with this? Well, the question I have for you is, what other choice do we have? Right? I mean, I'm not a big proponent of you only get what you can handle, but I am a huge proponent of you can handle whatever you get. So that's one of the things I try to keep in mind. And I don't like to focus too much on the past. It is important to know where you've been. But, I went to church one time, just once, and I heard a particular sermon. And the sermon talked about how everything on the human body is pointing forwards. Your eyes, your ears, your nose, your mouth, your hands, your feet, everything is pointing forward, right? There's only one thing that's facing backwards. And you do not want to go there. So where does that lead us? Well, in 2012, my sister and I, so all this happened in 2011 with the heart surgeries. In 2012, my sister and I were invited to go on a hiking expedition to the base camp of Mount Everest. And I was really excited about it, so I went to my doctors. Now, can you imagine after having 5 surgeries in 2011, the look that I got from my physicians? Dr. Day, what would you say to me? They thought I was crazy. And, you know, with a grain of salt, I think that's important, and you want to listen to that. And I don't want to take any unnecessary risks. I don't want to do anything I shouldn't be doing. But by the same token, I do want to continue to pursue my life and pursue my dreams. So I took their obstacles. I took the different things that they wanted to talk to me about, and I wanted to identify the various problems, and I wanted to see if I could overcome them. And as far as exercise is concerned, when I first went through all this, there was 2 different thoughts on exercise, 2 different schools of thought. One was your body's like a battery, and you don't want to drain that battery on things that are not necessarily important. The other school of thought was do what you can while you can. And to a certain extent, it's going to mask some of the difficulties. And for me, in my life, that's the route I chose, because these are my goals and these are my ambitions. So I took on a vigorous training program, and I began doing all kinds of cardio work, TRX, all kinds of different training programs. And I finally made a deal with my doctors. What do I need to do for you to let me to go to the base camp of Mount Everest? And they essentially said, 1, you got to get through a year with no more surgeries and no more problems. Because at the time, they really didn't think that was going to happen. And number 2, you have to go to high altitude, and you have to see how your body's going to react. Because one of the biggest problems with high altitude, anybody can get sick at high altitude. Anybody can have problems at high altitude. But with muscular dystrophy, our bodies crave the oxygen. So when you go into an environment where the oxygen is somewhat depleted, you don't know how your body's going to respond with the heart conditions, with the muscular dystrophy, and with all the other outlining factors. So to begin, I took a couple of trips. Again, I like to travel. That's one of my things. So I took a trip to Vancouver, Canada, and I did some hiking between the elevations of 5,000 and 7,000 feet. And then I took it a step further, and I went out to Washington State, and I went to Mount St. Helens as well as Mount Rainier, and I did some hiking between 7,000 and 9,000 feet. And then also, to spend a good amount of time at high altitude, I went to a place called Alma, Colorado. Now, Alma is a rinky-dink little town in the middle of Colorado that a lot of people didn't hear of, but they've got the highest municipality in the US. So what that means is they have a post office at the highest level in the US. So while I was in Alma, I was able to stay every day above 10,000 feet. Because a lot of us, anybody pretty much, can drive up to elevation, spend a little time there, kind of deal with the headaches, deal with some of the breathing problems, and then drive down. But the question is, can you stay at elevation for a period of time and be able to avoid the problems? So that's what I did. And thankfully, I got through all that with no problems. So I went back to my doctors, and finally they gave me the permission, reluctantly. Nobody wanted me to go, but they gave me the permission to go. They said they weren't any longer going to get in my way. So we went out to Mount Everest, and a lot of people have this impression. Mount Everest, it's the tallest mountain in the world, and I didn't know a whole lot about it, but it's in the middle of the Himalayas. So essentially, a lot of people think that you're going to start at the bottom of Mount Everest and you're going to walk up to a certain point. And that is not at all the case. So the fact is, if you were to take the 14 tallest peaks on Earth, 8 of them are in the Himalayas. So I come from Chicago. So in the US, we have the tallest building in the US. We have the Sears Tower. Now, when you go into Chicago, can you see the Sears Tower from everywhere you go? No, absolutely not. There's a lot of other tall buildings that can get in the way. So when I went out to Mount Everest, could I see Mount Everest right away? No, all these other big mountains were getting in the way. And by the way, I was like, really? Do I really have to climb all those? That was kind of ridiculous. You guys can laugh, it's okay. All right, so basically, I'll come over here for a second. We start off in a mountain town called Lukla, and we really weave in and out of the mountains all the way up to Everest Base Camp. So we're not starting off at the bottom and working our way up. It's really an interesting climb, which I'll share with you a little bit about in the next slide. So essentially, it's about a 40-mile hike to get from this mountain town of Lukla, which is like a staging area in the mountains, all the way up to Everest Base Camp. And the average person can do that anywhere in 8 to 10 days. Now, because of my conditions and because of the precautions we wanted to take, first of all, we wanted to give myself some more time to acclimate at the high altitude, because again, we didn't know how I was going to react. And we also brought an oxygen canister with us, which is often not done as far as the hiking up to base camp is concerned. But like any disease, you face some unexpected challenges in the journey. So here I am, and I start off in this mountain town of Lukla. That's at 9,300 feet. And I'm going to go to Everest Base Camp. And all my preparation was to kind of go up this big hill and get up to Everest Base Camp at 17,600 feet. So the very first day of my journey, how did we start? For the first 4 hours, we're walking downhill. I mean, come on, really? So whatever goes down, you got to go back up, right? So that's how my journey began. And, one of the things I also want to mention is when you have a goal, I talk about journeys. When you have a goal, it's important to have goals. It's important to have ambitions. But by the same token, don't skip the journey. Appreciate the journey. Appreciate what you're going through. Find the positives and enjoy yourself. And I got to tell you, Mount Everest was not easy. The way I kind of claim it, it's the hardest thing I've ever done on purpose. So there's a lot of difficult things that we all go through, but this is the most difficult thing I've ever done on purpose. But by the same token, it was amazing, and it was beautiful. And I am so fortunate to be able to come back and share this story with all of you. So I finally got to Everest Base Camp on April 20th. And it was a process, and it was absolutely wonderful. And it wasn't just about the journey, and it wasn't just about the goal, but it was also about the people you meet along the way. So again, I re-emphasize the people that you meet in this room. We all have individual stories to tell. Every one of us are special, and we should appreciate our journey and share it with others. And the fact of the matter is, I had the ability to meet some wonderful people, including the Chilean expedition team, which is in the picture over on the right. And I got to tell you, when I got to Mount Everest Base Camp, all I wanted was a hug. That's all I wanted, from somebody who knew what I was going through. And my sister had taken this journey with me, and unfortunately, she suffered from altitude sickness. So by the time I got up to Everest Base Camp, my sister was no longer with me. So who am I going to get the hug from? Well, there are people that always come in and out of our lives. And sometimes, unfortunately, when you go through something severe, the people who you really thought were going to be close to you sometimes aren't. And sometimes people you didn't know and you never expected anything from are your biggest supporters. And so when I met the Chilean expedition team, the mountaineers, it is such a wonderful group of people, and they are so supportive. So when I finally got up to Everest Base Camp, and they knew a little bit about my story, and they knew a little bit about what I was trying to do, I got the greatest man hugs I could ever imagine. And it was absolutely wonderful. I loved every second of it. So now, I don't know if you guys are very familiar with the history over the course of the last year, but I got to Everest Base Camp on April 20th, and it takes a lot less time to hike back down. It's just as difficult, it's just as dangerous, but by the same token, you don't have to worry about the acclimatization. So a lot of times you can move a little bit faster. So we got back to the mountain town of Lukla on April 24th. We were supposed to fly back to Kathmandu on April 25th. And as fate would have it, there was a 7.9 magnitude earthquake in Nepal on April 25th of 2015, and I was right smack dab in the middle of it. And it was, by far and away, one of the most horrifying things I've ever seen. Now, again, just to give you a little synopsis of my background, I've been working in healthcare for the last 10 plus years, and I actually work with advanced care planning, palliative care, and end-of-life care. So I kind of teach people, especially physicians, but sometimes patients and families, about the benefits of end-of-life care. And I saw a lot of death, and I saw a lot of destruction, and it was horrible. I saw ground zero in the Himalayas. But you know what?
from any time there's a challenge, from any time there's a detours. You can either focus on the negative or you can focus on the positive. And there is always positive to be found. I was very fortunate. I myself was not injured. There were people very nearby me that had been crushed by falling debris. My sister was back in Kathmandu at the time. She had a couple of fractured ribs. So, I mean, there was a lot of death and destruction, and I was very fortunate, which I'm thankful for. It caused a lot of anxiety and a lot of fear. And when people go through these challenges, when we go through these challenges, what do we search for? We want some normalcy. We want to get a good night's sleep. We want to get a good night rest. We want to have lunch with a good friend. We want to be able to walk from point A to point B without getting tired, without having to take a seat, and without the pain. And sometimes that's hard to happen. But in 3 days, the day after the earthquake took place, I was fortunate enough to be able to get medically evacuated on a helicopter that brought me back to Kathmandu. And I spent a couple of days in Kathmandu, and nobody was able to stay in the hotels at that time. We had to pitch tents in the back of the hotel. But the people in Nepal, all of them, I mean, there was over 11,000 people that died. There was countless others that were injured and taken away from their homes. So where's the positive side in that? The positive side is 3 days later, by the time I was leaving, in their search for normalcy, they started to open up shops. Simple things like laughing and joking and talking to some of the people that were visiting. I mean, they were such an amazing and strong people. In those couple of days, I really learned a lot, and they were amazing. And again, focus on the people in this room. You can really learn a lot. Everybody in this room is amazing, for one reason or another. So I had to put this in there, because when I got back from Mount Everest, when I first got to Kathmandu, I was one of the first people to be evacuated from the mountains. So the New York Times came up to me and asked me if they could do an interview. And I said, sure, what the heck. So by the time I got back to Chicago a week later, my phone was ringing off the hook. And I ended up doing a whole bunch of interviews, and I ended up being on TV. I was famous for 3 days until the story was over. So this is a picture from my last interview with Eddie Azula on Chicago Tonight, another great person. I've just had the opportunity to meet some great people along this journey. So, what else do I want to talk about? When people ask me what inspires me to move on, and again, I'm preaching to the choir, and I can't say this enough, everybody in this room inspires me to move on. There's a movie that I absolutely love. It's called The Last Castle. And so there's, it's basically a military movie. And so there's an officer in the movie played by Robert Redford. And one of the soldiers is talking to him. And, he was captured and he was a prisoner of war. And the soldier said, my gosh, we looked at you every day and we looked at what you were going through. We looked at you being tortured. And wow, the fact that you went through all this, that you really kept us alive. And Robert Redford, the officer, said, you know what? I don't know what you guys were looking at. It was the fact that you looked to me every day, and it was the fact that you were looking for me to carry on. It was that kept me alive. So what inspires me? You guys do. Every single one in this room inspires me. And the hardest lesson I ever learned was the fact that there are certain things in life you can control, and there are certain things in life you can't control. And then there's other things that you can influence. So I wanted to include this slide, and I wanted to find out, what's the first thing everybody notices when you look at this slide? Do you notice all the different diseases, all the different diagnoses, all the different conditions? Because let me tell you something, that is not what defines us. These conditions, they don't define us. We are who we are, and we can do what we want. And that was the hardest lesson for me to learn. And I know it's cliche, but I focused a lot on Serenity's prayer. May God grant me the serenity to accept the things I cannot change, the courage to change the things that I can, and the wisdom to know the difference. We can't control anything, everything. There are things in our life that are going to happen far out of our control. But what we do with it is our own attitude and our own choice. And so one of the things I like to focus on, I've got little cards that I can provide that have my information, so you can either see me or there's a booth up front. Feel free to take a look at my card. Feel free to take a look at my website. Feel free to reach out to me. We're all going to have lunch here. I would love to meet anybody else in the room who has DM2. If you have the opportunity to come up and introduce yourself. And anybody who wants to hear more about my story as the day goes on, feel free to ask. But one final thought I want to leave you with. Well, actually, two final thoughts. So hopefully my book will be ready on April 25th of 2016, the 1-year anniversary of the earthquake. But the last thing I want to leave you with is a saying. And we are all in charge of who we are. We're all in charge of what we do. We're all in charge of where we go. And every single one of us can be forever strong. So thank you.